Imagine a civilization that touched the heavens, a power so absolute it reshaped the very world to its will. This was the Valyrian Freehold, an empire not ruled by a single monarch, but by 40 ancient and powerful dragonlord families for 5,000 years. Their dominion was built on the two things that command fear and reverence above all others. Blood magic and dragons. Their power was so immense that they conquered the ancient Giscari Empire, sowing its fields with salt and sulfur to ensure nothing would ever grow there again, a testament to their terrifying might. Their cities were marvels of impossible architecture, with topless towers of fused, dragon-forged stone that scraped the clouds, and vast sphinxes with the faces of forgotten gods guarding their gates. This was a society where sorcerers wove spells to control the very volcanoes they lived upon, harnessing the planet's molten heart for their own gain. Their engineers carved roads of black stone that were as smooth as glass and endured for centuries. Binding their vast territories together, its influence stretched across most of the known world. A titan of history whose legacy was thought to be eternal. From the summer sea to the shivering sea, its might was unquestioned, and then, in a single day, it was all gone. An apocalypse of fire, smoke, and shattered earth. A cataclysm so total it broke a continent and made the very seas boil. History calls it the Doom of Valyria, a tragedy. A random, albeit massive, geological event. A cautionary tale about hubris. But what if it wasn't? What if history, as we know it, has the story profoundly wrong? What if the obliteration of the most powerful empire in the world wasn't an accident, but a meticulously planned assassination on a continental scale? While the world remembers the Doom as a day of terrible, shocking loss, one family and one family alone had foreknowledge of the end. The Targaryens, they weren't the strongest, wealthiest, or most influential of the 40 families. By many accounts, they were a minor house of middling status, far from the true centres of power, yet they were the only dragonlords to escape. As every single one of their powerful, arrogant rivals burned, they watched safely from a distance, the sole inheritors of a world-spanning legacy. Was this a miracle of divine foresight? A stroke of unbelievable, generation-defining luck? Or was it the final, terrifying move in the greatest and most brutal political coup in the history of the world? To understand the sheer genius of the escape, you must first understand the world they were so desperate to flee. For millennia, the Valyrian Freehold was a viper's nest of power, a cutthroat oligarchy governed by the 40 ancient and vainglorious dragonlord families. They competed endlessly and ruthlessly for status, for wealth, for the mightiest dragons, and for influence within the capital. This was a society of apex predators who believed their command of dragons and sorcery made them gods among men. In theory, all land-owning citizens had a voice, but in reality, only the dragonlords held true power. In this unforgiving political landscape, where families constantly schemed for dominance, House Targaryen was far from the top of the food chain. They were a respectable house, certainly with dragons of their own, but they lacked the prestige and raw power of houses whose names are now lost to time. Families that likely possessed more and larger dragons than the Targaryens ever did. They were easily dismissed, a non-threat in the great game of Valyrian politics. Then came the vision. 12 years before the sky would crack open and the earth would swallow an empire, Daenerys, the young maiden daughter of Lord Enar Targaryen, was reportedly plagued by a series of horrifying nightmares. She didn't just see fire, she felt the world breaking beneath her feet. She saw the 14 flames, the massive ring of volcanoes that ring the Valyrian Peninsula, erupting not randomly but in a coordinated, impossible fury that suggested a malevolent will. She saw the very stone of their impossible towers melting like wax, the great sphinxes weeping tears of molten rock. She saw thousands of dragons falling from a sky choked with ash, their own fires useless against the encroaching darkness. She saw the jewel of civilization consumed in a single night, its people turned to screaming shadows and pillars of ash, their bodies fused to the very streets they walked on. She saw the absolute and total end of their world. Her visions were so potent, so terrifyingly specific, that she would be known for all time as Daenerys the Dreamer. In a society built on overwhelming pride and a belief in their own invincibility, presenting such a prophecy was tantamount to declaring oneself a lunatic. The dragonlords of Valyria were masters of the known world. They did not flee from shadows or a young girl's bad dreams. But Daenerys was so utterly convincing, her terror so absolute and palpable, that her father, Enar, made a decision that would forever label his family as cowards in the annals of their peers. He heeded her warning. In a move that shocked the freehold and invited open ridicule, he sold off the Targaryen estates in the capital and their ancestral lands on the Valyrian peninsula. He gathered his entire family, his considerable wealth, his slaves and his 5 dragons, including the fearsome Balerion, the Black Dread. He then fled to a remote, grim, windswept island at the far edge of the known world, Dragonstone. To their rivals, this was an act of laughable weakness, the mighty dragonlords of Valyria, masters of the world, running from a teenage girl's bad dreams. The Targaryens were openly mocked in the shining courts of their competitors, their name becoming a punchline. They had voluntarily chosen exile, abandoning the heart of global power for a desolate volcanic rock barely considered worth conquering. They were forgotten, and perhaps that was the entire point. 12 years later, nobody was laughing. The dooms struck exactly as Daenerys had supposedly dreamed. It was an event of unimaginable scale, a geological and magical chain reaction that continues to defy any rational explanation. The 14 flames, the chain of volcanoes that were the source of Valyria's immense power and wealth, became its funeral pyre. The entire peninsula shattered, collapsing into a newly formed toxic body of water that would come to be known as the Smoking Sea. The magnificent cities, with all their sorcerous arts and accumulated knowledge, vanished beneath waves of ash, fire, and boiling water. Every single Dragonlord family, every proud rival, every ambitious pretender to power who had once mocked at Enar's flight was incinerated. Every last one. And with them, nearly every other dragon in the world was annihilated in the fires of the Cataclysm. The source of Valyrian supremacy, the living weapons of mass destruction that had guaranteed their dominance for 5 millennia, was simply gone. Except, of course, for the 5 the Targaryens had prudently taken with them to Dragonstone. Balerion, the sole survivor of the dragons brought from Valyria, was now the most powerful creature in the world. Any other dragons that may have survived the initial blast were lost, and the secrets of taming and breeding them were erased from the world. From their supposedly remote fortress, the Targaryens didn't just survive. They witnessed the complete and total elimination of every single competitor. Consider the breathtaking strategic implications. It wasn't a partial collapse, it wasn't a civil war that left a few contenders standing. It was a clean slate. 39 rival families reduced to 0, thousands of dragons reduced to a mere handful, a global empire suddenly and violently left without a master. The Targaryens' escape, once seen as an act of cowardice and madness, now looked like a strategic masterstroke of impossible, world-altering genius. But here's what the history books won't tell you about Targaryen survival. Every merchant ship, every commercial port, every economic system in the known world answered to Valyrian dragonlords. They didn't just control trade, they owned it. The Doom didn't eliminate their enemies, it created the ultimate economic monopoly. Every ship that wanted to cross the narrow sea, every merchant who wanted to trade, every kingdom that needed protection, all of them had to come through the Targaryens. They didn't just survive the apocalypse, they became the world's only gatekeepers. But the 12-year timeline is the most damning detail. Daenerys' prophecy came exactly 12 years before the Doom, not 11 years, not 13. Why such perfect precision? Because it wasn't a prophecy, it was a countdown. 12 years to execute their plan, establish their alibi and position themselves as the world's only dragonlords. 12 years to sell their Valyrian estates without raising suspicion. 12 years to move their wealth and dragons to Dragonstone. 12 years to create the perfect escape story. Here's the chilling part. 12 years isn't random, it's precise planning. The question isn't whether they saw the future, it's how they knew exactly when to act. They were no longer a minor house, jockeying for position. In an instant, they became the sole inheritors of Valyria's legacy, its magic and its ultimate power. Dragonstone was no longer a remote backwater. It was the perfect, unassailable staging ground for future conquests. The castle, built with Valyrian stonemasonry to resemble dragons, was a formidable fortress in its own right. Its strategic location at the mouth of the Blackwater Bay gave it control over maritime traffic to the future site of King's Landing and a direct view of the fractured, squabbling kingdoms of Westeros. They held the ultimate weapons, the last dragons in the Western world, and now they had no one left to challenge them. But here's what makes this mathematically impossible. The question isn't whether Daenerys saw the future, the real question is cui bono? Who benefits? And the answer is chillingly, terrifyingly simple. Only the Targaryens. Was it a prophecy that saved them? Or did they simply flee the scene of a crime they helped orchestrate? The question of how they knew creates an even darker possibility. Dragonstone was isolated, yet they had perfect intelligence on volcanic activity, magical stability, and the precise moment to flee. Either they had an information network inside Valyria, or they were monitoring something much closer to home. In the immediate aftermath of the Doom, the world was thrown into utter chaos. With the heart of the Empire gone, the body began to tear itself apart in a century-long spasm of violence. This period, known to historians as the Century of Blood, was a maelstrom of warfare and societal collapse. The Free Cities, once colonies of Valyria, declared themselves independent and immediately began warring with one another for dominance. Volantis, the oldest and proudest of the Free Cities, fancied itself the heir to Valyria and launched a bloody, decades-long campaign to rebuild the Empire under its own rule. They conquered Lys and Myr for a time, but their ambition was met with a grand alliance of the other cities who beat them back. Even the Targaryens briefly involved themselves, with Aegon Targaryen flying Balerion to Lys to burn a Volantane fleet. In the east, the Dothraki horse lords, sensing the power vacuum, swept across the plains. They burned and sacked the great cities of the Kingdom of Sarnor, establishing their own Sea of Grass, where a mighty civilization once stood. The old world order was not just dead, it was being dismembered. And what were the Targaryens doing during this century of global anarchy? For the most part, they waited. From the gargoyle-adorned chambers of Dragonstone, they watched. They watched their former civilization's colonies exhaust themselves in futile wars. They watched new powers rise and fall. They watched as the continent of Westeros, their intended prize, remained divided, complacent, and utterly unprepared for what was to come. This wasn't idle waiting, it was the cold, calculated patience of a predator observing its ecosystem. They were consolidating their power, breeding their dragons. Varga and Merakes were hatched on the island from eggs brought from Valyria, and studying their future conquest. They had maps of Westeros, and Aegon himself had visited places like Old Town and Lannisport. Gathering intelligence long before his invasion, they were allowing the world to create the perfect power vacuum. that only they, with their unique weapons, could possibly fill. During this crucial century, their survival myth became their greatest political tool. The story of Daenerys the Dreamer was no longer a quirky family anecdote. It was polished into a legend of divine favour and prophetic destiny. It was irrefutable proof that the Targaryens were special, chosen by the gods themselves to survive the apocalypse. Their flight from Valyria wasn't cowardice, it was the will of fate. This narrative was the perfect cover story. It absolved them of any possible suspicion and cloaked their naked ambition in an aura of supernatural legitimacy. Who would dare question the motives of a family so clearly blessed by Providence? The prophecy wasn't just a tale they told their children, it became the foundational myth for a new dynasty. A dynasty born from the ashes of all their competitors, built on a terrible, world-shattering secret. The Doom of Valyria was the singular event that ended the old world and violently paved the way for the new out of a cataclysm that destroyed the most advanced civilization in history. It left the Targaryens as the last dragonlords, the sole proprietors of the greatest power the world had ever known. Were they merely the fortunate beneficiaries of a miraculous prophecy, a family chosen by fate to carry on Valyria's legacy? Or were they the authors of a much darker, much more terrifying story? A story of an ambitious minor house, tired of it being dismissed, who perhaps discovered a way to trigger the very cataclysm that destroyed their rivals. This conspiracy didn't just reshape the ancient world, it echoes through every Targaryen we've ever known. Jon Snow's secret parentage, Daenerys' claim to the Iron Throne, even their shared connection to dragons, all of it stems from this single world-shattering act. Jon Snow, raised as a bastard but secretly the legitimate heir to the throne, represents the ultimate Targaryen strategy, hiding in plain sight while claiming divine right. Daenerys, the conqueror who freed slaves and claimed her birthright, unknowingly carries forward the same pattern of using prophecy and divine favour to justify her rise to power. Were they destined to rule, or were they simply the beneficiaries of history's greatest cover-up? The Targaryens didn't just survive the Doom, they engineered the very foundation of their dynasty's claim to power. A pattern of manipulation and divine legitimacy that would echo through the centuries, culminating in two of the most legendary figures in Westeros history. Could they have used forbidden blood magic, the very source of Valyria's power, to orchestrate its downfall? Valyrian sorcerers were known to use spells to control the 14 Flames. It's possible a rival faction could use that same magic to make them lose control, or perhaps they found allies with a deep and burning hatred for the Freehold. One theory points to the nascent Faceless Men, the guild of assassins born in the hellish volcanic slave mines of the 14 Flames. The Faceless Men were born in those very volcanic mines, watching their brothers die daily. They had every reason to want their masters gone. It is told that eventually the Faceless Men brought the gift, not just to the slaves but to the masters as well. Could the Targaryens have hired these assassins to systematically eliminate the fire mages who kept the volcanoes in check, triggering the cataclysm? One fringe theory even suggests the gold the Targaryens used to pay for this service came from selling their Valyrian steel sword to the Lannisters. Did they flee not out of fear of a vision, but out of foreknowledge of their own terrible work? We may never know the truth. The city was obliterated, and with it all records and witnesses. All that is absolutely certain is that history is written by the victors. And in the wake of the Doom, the Targaryens were the only ones left alive to write it. What do you think truly caused the Doom? Was it a natural disaster, a magical backlash from the Valyrians' own hubris, or a calculated act of annihilation? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more secret histories.